Finally today, we expect a lot from our cattle come breeding season. Anything from providing adequate nutrients for calf growth through lactation to reproductive tract repair and return to estrus prior to the start of breeding season. These expectations are all expected within 90 days of calving to maintain that yearly calving interval. With all of that in mind, there are some considerations that can help animals meet those nutritional requirements at breeding and also ensure a successful breeding season. Market Journal's Mike Straub brings us more on this story.
When moving into breeding season, nutritional consideration for the cow is top priority.
When we think about nutritional considerations and moving into the breeding season, one of the big points that I really like to think about is where cows are at in terms of body condition. And so are cows maintaining and or gaining body condition moving into the breeding season? So the big thing we think about is when cows come through calving, that's a higher nutritional demand coming through calving, and then moving into lactation. So lactational demands are going to require some additional requirements for lactation, which ultimately is going to draw from those body condition reserves. And so making sure that our cows are maintaining is going to be a key when we move into breeding season.
Mid to late gestation is when nutritional requirements start to increase. The highest requirements come at the time of calving and lactation.
When cows go through gestation and thinking about those requirements, mid to late gestation, those requirements are starting to increase. And ultimately, once we get to calving, that's where some of our largest requirements and moving into lactation are going to be. And so cows will move from mid to late gestation. That energy will increase about 25%. And then those protein requirements will increase to about 10%. So we see a large increase in those requirements moving through gestation. And then keep in mind that once we move those animals out to pasture, we may see some changes in body condition for some of those females that may be losing a little bit of condition. So monitor body condition when those cows are out on pasture. And then when you're moving into the breeding season, are those cows maintaining condition at that point? Or do we need to be thinking about increasing that plane of nutrition to help them move through breeding and increase that body condition score?
Monitoring quality of forage is important to making sure your cow gets the nutritional requirement it needs.
When we think about native range, most of the time our forage is going to be pretty high quality at turnout, so around May. And this year it's been a little delayed with the drought in some areas in the Midwest. However, when we start moving through that grazing season, our forage starts to decline a little bit. And so when I think about that quality, most of the time our forage is going to be higher quality early in the grazing season, peak around June, and then start to tail off July into November. And so understanding the quality and quantity is going to be key. And then really thinking about where some of our requirements are in terms of our cows. And so usually around breeding time, that's also where we start to move into peak lactation. So those requirements are going to be increasing. And so making sure that we're around that 7% crude protein in our forages is going to be critical to one, feed the microbes, and then also make sure that those cows are maintaining body condition. So the first thing that we need to be thinking about is most oftentimes our forage is going to provide rumen-degradable protein that is adequate. And rumen-degradable protein is ultimately going to feed our microbes. And so that's kind of our first target, is make sure that those microbes in that rumen are meeting their requirements. Then the next source that we need to be thinking about is metabolizable protein. And so metabolizable protein is going to ultimately go to that cow. And so that's where her supplemental feed is going to, one, feed the microbes, and then help make sure that we're maintaining condition. And so when I think about supplementation, a great way that we can think about this is some targeted rumen undegradable protein sources, where we might use a distiller's cube or a dry distillers or a modified, and be able to figure out what our delivery methods are, but ultimately making sure that we're increasing our energy and making sure that that protein is over 7% to target microbes and then ultimately provide something for those cows.
If forage quality isn't sufficient or there isn't enough to get through fall, it's important to look to different strategies to maintain nutritional needs for the cow.
A few strategies that I would recommend would be potentially looking at early weaning. When we think about early weaning, we usually try to make sure that those calves are at least a couple months old, just to ensure that those rumen are developed and they're on more of a forage-based diet. They still may be consuming some milk, but that transition for those calves can usually be pretty streamlined if we can manage them appropriately. So early weaned calves, that's going to basically start to decrease our lactational demands in those cows. So basically we're taking away that lactational demand, which ultimately is going to reduce their requirements at that point. So a great group of cows that we can target are maybe our younger cows, our 2 and 3 year old cows that, one, are still growing, 2, that we're asking her to lactate maybe once or twice, and this is pretty new for her, right? And so when we think about making sure that we can reduce some of those requirements, early weaning can be something where then we can start to conserve on the forage consumption, because we're either removing those calves and reducing that intake, and ultimately helps us kind of manage that forage a little differently with cows, and then we can manage those calves a little differently on a different pasture, or maybe even bring those calves into a dry lot where we start to get them on a high energy dense feed that ultimately is going to get them on a positive plane of growth and get them transitioning well.
Nutritional requirements are key for a cow through breeding season. Knowing when nutritional needs are at their highest, monitoring quality of forage, and using different strategies can ensure breeding season is successful. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.